I mean, I guess the take home message is that reality is not fixed, meaning it's not what we think it is. Reality is relative. Reality is dependent on what our view or outlook is on what we're looking at. And today we're going to play a little bit more with not just the outlook, but also where we place our attention and the perspective we choose to look at what's happening. And that can give radically different possible realities. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So we're still looking at how reality is relative. And today we're going to be playing around with where we place our attention. That's what I mean by focal point, and the perspective in which we choose to view things. And so does everyone have something to write with? Okay. I want to go straight into activity and we'll see how things unfold. I didn't feel like our conversation last week on view was complete. So I wanted to bring in a few other aspects of view. And I think that because we have the tendency, the mind has this tendency to identify with what's happening. And what that means is we somehow take something that's completely objective and we make it subjective by making it something about us or the other person. We have this tendency to become enmeshed with a virtual reality that the mind creates that pulls away from us actually being with what's happening. And so in a way, we're kind of missing out on a precious opportunity. And that opportunity is to really look at whatever is happening is a valuable piece of information, whether we like it or not. So thoughts point towards what's actually happening in the unconscious. Feelings point towards needs that might be met or unmet. Our reaction points towards us responding to something that's happening, and maybe the reaction might be a result of us picking something up that's not even conscious. But by looking at our reactions, we might get clues about what unconsciously we've picked up. So it's more sources of information. Mistakes that we tend to judge ourselves on are an essential aspect of learning and growth, right? So all of these things that we often attribute a value to, a valence, like this should be happening or this shouldn't be happening, or this is good or this is bad, this is right, this is wrong. All of those are actually neutral. And the view is, what if all of those were just pieces of information? What if instead of identifying with what's happening and making it about us, what if we were just to stay at the layer of what's actually happening? So I'll give an example. I'm having a conversation with a friend. The friend is looking out the window. I'm really wanting this friend to pay attention to what I'm saying. This person continues to stare out the window. All of a sudden, I start feeling frustrated. I start feeling doubt. I don't know if I'm interesting enough. I don't know if there's something going on in our relationship that's being unspoken of. This is the process of identification. I took something very objective, which was I'm speaking to my friend's looking out the window. And all of a sudden, I'm making it somehow about me. I am the cause. Or another way of identifying could be this person is not paying attention to me. This person doesn't care about what I have to say. I don't matter. This person is being disrespectful. They're not even making eye contact. Why is there always this asymmetry in our relationship, right? So you can see now I'm making it about them, but ultimately it's still about me. And none of that actually is happening for sure. All of that is interpretation. All of that is in the virtual reality of my mind. However, it's not to discard that this person looking out the window while I'm speaking is not valuable information. Something is happening and I'm noticing it, and it gives me clues about something that I still don't have the full capacity to understand. And so how do we contend with enmeshment, since this is such a habit that we do, where we immediately get sucked into whatever is happening and we make it about us, and we're like the main protagonist of the story, and we miss out on valuable information. And the antidote to enmeshment, how do we separate back out and become us, watching an experience versus becoming enmeshed with the experience, is curiosity. What's going on here? What's actually happening? Why are they looking out the window? What are they seeing? What's going on for them? And so this is where we can bring mindfulness in. Mindfulness is staying with the experience. We can use noting practice that we talked about in one of the first classes of deconstructing the mind. Right? We're just noticing. What am I noticing? Oh, I'm noticing they're looking out the window. Oh, I'm noticing doubt. Oh, I'm noticing I'm wanting to matter. Oh, I'm noticing that I'm making a story about this and I'm blaming them. That's the experience. And then the other aspect to be able to deepen our understanding about what's actually happening is using inquiry. This is wise use of mind, noting and inquiry. And the inquiry really here is, what is it that I'm actually needing in this moment that I'm not getting? Or what are they needing? Okay. So again, this comes along with view. The view is that everything is valuable information. And how we relate to what is happening is what matters. And that is going to determine our sense of reality. We can have a virtual reality that is pretty skewed and far from the truth, or we can choose to actually get more clarity about what is truly happening in that moment. Ultimately, I think that what we're all wanting is we're wanting to be connected to what is actually happening. We're wanting to be connected to our own lives and those that are in our lives. And so much of our time is actually spent somewhere else. And that believing that something else is a choice, if we're conscious and awake, if we're not enmeshed. And so the breaking of that enmeshment is where the practice is in mindfulness. Is, can I stay in observation? Can I notice that I'm getting dysregulated and activated? And can I, in that moment, be able to just note it, that it's happening, already breaks a little bit that enmeshment. If I can jump straight into inquiry, like what's actually wanting attention right now? What's really happening? What am I needing? That really allows us to view whatever is going on as really a gateway into connection, not a problem. And if I were to use that inquiry versus blame to my friend that's looking out the window, I would get more clarity. I would get closer to what's actually happening. Hey, I noticed that you're looking out the window while I'm talking. What's going on for you? Right? And I get clarity, and then there's more connection. And I also get evidence that whatever I was believing before is not true. This is wise use of mind, inquiry. So I wanted to try to see if we can make an activity out of this and apply some of this to maybe something that's real in your life. This will require you thinking about some area where there's some level of conflict. On a scale of 0 to 10, please don't pick anything that is very complex or traumatizing. It could be something as simple as what I had, or if there's something more meaningful that you want to work on, that's fine too. I would say keep it at a level 6, maybe 7 maximum. Okay. You're not going to be given a whole lot of time. And so what you're going to do is you're going to briefly describe the problem to your partner. And I underlined the word briefly there, because the moment we start going into the story about what happens, we really become that protagonist and we lose the sense of even what's going on in the moment, even if we're just retelling the story. So I'll give you a little bit of time to reflect, come up with what your scenario is that you want to describe to your partner, and try to succinctly describe it. And I'll put, oops, oh my goodness, what happened? And I'll put all of this in the chat so you don't have to write things down. So I'll model an example, right? I'm living with my brother for the last month. Every time I'm coming into the kitchen, it looks like this. I feel frustrated. I feel disrespected. It's just really, really irritating for me to come into the kitchen like this. And it gets in the way of me being able to cook and be efficient with my time, right? So I kind of went off there, but it's still succinct. You got the idea of what's going on. So the partner is going to practice reflective listening, okay? You're not going to say verbatim what you heard. You're going to try to be even more succinct than the person that shared with you. And in 1 or 2 sentences, you're going to captivate what's objective about the situation. So in this scenario, it would be, there's dirty dishes in the sink and you're frustrated. It doesn't have to be perfect. Okay, you're just helping your partner orient towards what's actually objective. And again, I'll put these prompts in the chat so that you have that with you. And then what you're going to do is you're both going to kind of collaborate. You're going to let the speaker that's telling the story to come up with their own objective observations if they can, right? So like, what actually happened? Well, there's dirty dishes in the sink. You know, what else is going on? Frustration. What else is going on? The want for efficiency, right? So we're just making short objective statements about what actually is true. Like if your partner if I went on about like my brother and he's disrespectful and he's been living here for a month and he's not paying rent and the least that he could do is like do his freaking dishes, right? All of that is not necessarily important because it's not pertaining to what's actually happening right here. All of that is my interpretation. And then as part of this, we're not just making this a cognitive exercise. I'd like you to notice how your feelings change as you go through this process of just trying to make observations. We're also going to be asking questions, right? So you can come up with questions. You can write down questions, or you can just do this verbally. So speaker that's sharing out, maybe one of my questions is, why is he leaving dirty dishes in the sink? Right? Why do I actually have a problem with this? What is it that I'm not getting that I want from the situation? You can come up with whatever question you want. We're just, again, the questions don't matter. It's the shifting into becoming curious that is going to alchemize the process. Okay, so for those of you that are A+ students and you want to do this perfectly, I'm giving you full permission to like, just do it. It doesn't have to be done right. Okay. And then what we'll do is we'll switch roles. So the other person will get a chance to share their story, and then you'll reflect back, you know, what you think is the essence of their experience. You'll give them a chance to come up with observations. And when they request, do you have any observations? Or I think I'm full here. Is there something I'm missing? Then you can give some observations and then switch to asking let them ask questions about their experience or the other's experience. And then, you know, when they feel full, you can add on yours, and then we'll have a debrief period. Let's use a little bit of this time right now for a general debrief. And what I'm actually most curious about is the process, like having gone through that process, the initial stickiness that your conflict had as you were relating it at first to your partner, did that change? Or what did you discover along going through that process? Curiosity is a total game changer to view. Because when we come into difficult situations, the view is that they're wrong and I'm right, or, you know, something's being done to me and it's not okay. And when we go into curiosity, all of a sudden we're present and we're not sure, and anything is possible, and the interest is there, Whereas when we're in blame or in a victim mode, our attention is very narrow. The field of scope of possibility is very narrow. And when we're in curiosity, all of a sudden it widens. And we can feel that widening as kind of an unburdening of the heart, right? There's less stickiness to the story. We're less enmeshed. So thanks for that share. Any other observations? So much in what you just said. One thing that stands out is the state in which we decide to do this exercise really matters on the outcome. I mean, no matter what, it can be helpful. But if I'm triggered and I'm trying to go through this exercise, it might be harder to do because I'm less resourced, I'm less available, versus if I'm just casually doing it when, I'm not really thinking about the conflict, it's going to have a wildly different outcome. But both will serve in breaking the momentum of the enmeshment to get us to look at it in a different way. So I love that you brought up state. It's going to vary depending, the outcome of the exercise will vary depending on what your state is. You mentioned also safety, that there was a sense of safety that emerged through going through this process. And a part of that is that our organism feels safe. And the word lightness was also used a few times when it knows that we're in alignment with what's actually happening. When we're in story, when we're in trigger, when we're in virtual reality, we're not actually connected to what's truly happening. So there is not necessarily a sense of safety. When the organism actually is oriented and connected to what is true in that moment, it can relax because it has the available information that it needs to be able to come up with the most appropriate response. And so there might be a sense of safety. It's just like, yeah, okay, now I'm attuned to what's happening and I can deal with this appropriately. Versus when I'm triggered, I'm in story, I'm completely distracted. So there isn't even the possibility to really know what's actually happening so that I can come up with the right response. So thanks for that. Yeah. It's so interesting how where most of our attention goes is to the content, right? The story about what's happening. But what's really generating all that content is what's underneath. And what's underneath is the feelings. And when we're able to identify what the feelings are, then we're actually able to go a level lower that, which are what are the unmet needs that are generating those feelings, which are signals to our system trying to communicate to us and like, hey, pay attention, pay attention, pay attention, right? There's this need that's not being met. And instead we're like over here in the stories, like, but she did this and he did that. And like, this is what this means. And, when we're not down to what is actually calling for attention. So I love that you were able to drop down those levels and kind of unpack and land with what actually matters. And when we do go through that descent process, again, there's that sense of safety. It's like, oh, she's listening to me, right? The organism's producing all of this stuff. It's like, okay, I got the attention. And a part of it also is empathy, right? A lot of our frustration when we're in conflict is that we want the other person to understand where we're coming from. We want them to know what we're feeling. We want them to know what we're going through. And unfortunately, our strategy for communicating that is going to make sure that it's never going to happen, right? Our strategy is we're going to blame them and we're going to tell them what's wrong. And they're not going to hear anything of what we're saying. They're just going to feel the full force of our energy and they're going to shut down. But when we go through the process of asking ourselves, what's actually happening here? What actually matters? That is self-empathy. So what we were seeking externally is actually being met by ourselves. And there's something very empowering about that, because not only are we receiving the empathy that we're yearning for, we're able to offer that to ourselves. So we're no longer dependent on external circumstances to receive that. When we move into needs, as you said, there's not really a valence to it because it's relatable and it's undisputable. It's a need. Whereas right or wrong has positionality and a lot of bias, and with that, it's going to come a lot of valence. Needs are also objective, right? Our interpretation of what's right or what's wrong is completely subjective. And yeah, we waste a lot of time in conflict focused on that. So I love what you're pointing out, because what you're pointing out is a shift in view, right? The shift from the view that there's a right and there's a wrong. There is the, at fault and the one that is being, transgressed, to the view being, hey, we all have fundamental needs here. We're all wanting to meet those fundamental needs, and our behaviors are stemming from that. So what exactly is the need that's not being met for myself and the other person? And that creates a completely different possible reality. We can start seeing how view is really important. And then from there, also what we decide to use as the focal point of our attention also is really important. And those, we do have choice. And from those, we start generating possible realities, many different possible realities that are outside of the scope of the narrowness of where we started, which is with a fixed reality. And that fixed reality wasn't even based on what was actually happening. It was a virtual reality. So you can see how far away we have actually gotten. Yeah, I mean, you can play around with that. So my answer is always experiment and see what you find out. My experience is that I actually can't focus on somebody else's needs until I have at least noticed what mine are. And that's the value of the self-empathy. Because if I'm focusing on somebody else's need, I'm not really focusing on their need. I think I'm focusing on their need, but I'm doing that as a strategy to still meet my need. And so it's not an authentic caring of what's going on for them. It's a caring about what's going on for them so I can get what I need still. The self-empathy allows us to meet our needs so that we're coming at it from a place where our cup is full. And so we are available to know what's going on for the other person. The other thing that I've noticed in my own experience is when I redirect my attention to their needs without looking at my own needs, it's still felt that what I'm doing is contriving or manipulating to get something that I want. Like the other person can feel that. And then what that does is it creates distrust. And yeah, then it makes it really hard. Usually our system will give us information about whether we are self-betraying, and self-betraying as in prioritizing somebody else's needs over our own. That it won't feel good to focus on their needs. There will be a feeling of scarcity around that, or desperation, or something uncomfortable. It won't feel like a gift. It will feel like some kind of loss or cost, because it is, right? It's prioritizing somebody else's needs over our own. It's self-sacrifice. That's an excellent question. Thank you. Like, how do you request somebody else to share what their needs are without it being tinged with this feeling of you're trying to manipulate them by knowing what their needs are? And focusing on how to say it so it doesn't come out sounding like you're manipulating. It really comes down to what your genuine intention is for asking somebody else's need. So I guess what I'm saying is the focus is not how you say it. The focus is on what are your motivations. And if your motivations are clean, whatever you say, even if you say it wrong or it comes out not how you want it to, it's not going to carry the residue of manipulation. So that's why we do our own inner work. So if you're genuinely interested in what's going on for the other person, like what is it that they need to feel comfortable or to feel safe, and you just say it that way, I'm wondering, I'm really, being upfront, transparent about why you're wanting to know could be helpful. Like, your safety really matters to me. And I'm wondering, what is it that you're needing in this moment that would support your safety, for example? And they might not have the vocabulary for needs, and they might be really specific. Maybe they'll go into strategy, like what I'm needing for safety is for you to knock on the door before you come in. Or what I'm needing for safety is to know that I can be alone without being punished for it afterwards. Right. And so that they can use their own language, but it's the inquiry, it's the interest. Actually,
you're frozen.
It's the interest that matters more, not the question. It's the motivation that is what's going to be perceived by the other, not the words. Which is great, because that means we can mess up the words as long as our intention is pure. There is something, if the other person is perceiving it as contriving and the intention is that it wasn't, it could be that they have a bias from previous experiences, that different things have been used on them or they have been manipulated in the past. So they're already carrying that as the lens in how they're viewing everything that's happening. So even though you're clean and your intention is not of that, it could be misperceived by the other. Right. And being able to call that as it's happening is like, I'm noticing that I'm really wanting to know what your needs are because I'm really wanting to support your safety. And I'm sensing a little bit of tension going on right now. And I'm curious what's going on for you. So I use the same technique. I'm still noting what's happening. And I'm using inquiry to get more information. And I'm staying with my intention of really genuinely being interested. Now, if that inquiry in any way has the blame, like, here I am asking about your needs for safety, and all of a sudden you're like, being an ass about it, right? That's going to be picked up. So this is what I'm saying is the clean really comes from the purity of our intention. And I think that we are protected by that, even if we're misperceived, right? Because if we're misperceived by the other, we're actually unaffected by it if we're clean. Because I know that my intention is clean. And so I know that their version, how they're reading it, is distorted. So I have nothing to defend. I don't even need to convince them because I know that I'm clean. Right? So that's the protection. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Okay, cool. Okay, I'm going to shift gears again. So we kind of looked at how view really matters. It's going to determine our sense of reality. Most of the time, our view is skewed or very narrow because our attention is not actually on what's happening, but it's on a story that we've created. And there's a negativity bias. We've talked about how the brain has a natural negativity bias. So it's really off. And a way for us to awaken in all of that is to get curious so that we can broaden the possibility. And the view when we get curious is, I actually don't know what's going on. That's the view. Right? Or the view is whatever's going on is not a problem. It's information. And I need more information so that I can solidify and have a sense of what actually is true. So now I want to play a little bit with the view that we generally have on challenges. Because I don't know about you all, but when I'm going through a challenging situation, the last thing I want to do is actually experience it. I'm going to do everything possible to get rid of that challenge. I'm either going to fix the problem or I'm going to avoid it, go do something else, or I'm going to somehow manipulate that challenge so that it works for me. And so whatever your avoidance strategy is, we all have our own flavor of that. We've talked about that in the previous class. I just want to note that it's okay to have those strategies because they are, in a sense, trying to protect us against what's unpleasant, and it's totally understandable. What I want to do is I want to share my view on challenges, and I'm going to share that with a story. And I want to use this story for us to play around also with not just changing the view, but also changing our perspective in which we look at what's happening. And so some of you already know that this is a picture of me and my father. And my father was in a car accident, and he was a traumatic brain injured patient for 20 years or so. And towards the last 7 years of his life, he went through dementia. And this led to a severe loss of physical coordination and ability, all the way to the part where he could no longer move his body or talk or communicate, or even swallow, to also the loss of his awareness, it's dementia. And it was an extremely excruciatingly long process. It was 7 years of watching a human being unravel, both on the physical and also in the cognitive sense. And it was one of the most, actually, it was the most difficult thing I've ever had to go through, was this process. And while I was in it, it was the worst thing I could possibly be experiencing. I felt completely alone. I had no idea what to do. I was given the responsibility of making all of his medical and end of life decisions. And I did not feel like I was supported by the social structure that we're in or the medical field. And things just kept getting worse. And the types of decisions I was needing to make, the stakes were getting higher and higher. And this went all the way to the point of basically his death. And there was something very beautiful also that happened along with these challenging times, which was very hard to focus on when it was happening. Because when it was happening, it was just this awful thing that should not be happening to me. This is totally unfair. Why do I have to deal with this? Right? My attention was somewhere else. My view was, this challenge is a problem. Today, now that I have more distance from what happened, he passed away 5 years ago, I'm actually able to look back, and my perspective is completely different because I'm not in it. I'm far enough away from it that there's distance to actually see the parts that I was unable to see when I was so dysregulated and I was in it. And what I've come to realize is that what I went through with my father was the biggest gift I could have ever received in my lifetime. My father losing his awareness is what got me curious about studying awareness. This is what put me on the path of mindfulness, which is a path that I want to walk for the rest of my life. My father losing his ability to speak, to be able to advocate for his needs, led me to need to learn how to attune to him in such a deep level, where just by looking in his eyes, I needed to guess what it was that he was feeling and he was needing. And so through this journey, I also discovered what it was to purely love somebody without needing anything in return, because he was unable to give me what it was that I was wanting. And to be fully of service without any other motivation aside from this deep desire to be able to love and serve this being that was passing out of this lifetime. And so now, today, the way I look at challenges is very different. Even if they're unpleasant or even if they're uncomfortable, I see them as incredible opportunities for growth, development, and love. The discovery of the full ranges of the possibilities of my emotions, and that everything that was unpleasant that came up was an added story that I put in there. But if I stayed with the purity of the emotions itself, it was a gateway into my own humanness. It was exquisite. And so with this exercise, what I wanted to invite is for you to journal and choose a significant challenge that you had in the past. And, that has already happened so that you have enough space so that you can look back, because if you're in it right now, it still would be beneficial, but you might not have as much perspective to actually see the fullness of the experience. So I'd like you to pick something that was really challenging for you in the past and looking at it through the lens of not what was problematic about it, but what were the gifts that this particular experience has brought into your life. And how does that actually influence who you are today? How are you different because of this experience? And as you go through this process, again, making it a mindful activity, not just a cognitive activity, where you're paying attention to what's happening to your body, what's happening to your emotions as you're going through this process, and how through this exercise does this affect your view on the challenges that you had, that challenge that you had, and potentially your view on challenges itself. Any questions about the activity? So it's just a writing prompt. And I'm going to give you about 8 minutes and I'll check back in to see if you need more time. I really want you to take some time with this. If you have leftover time, you're welcome to just sit with the felt sense that has emerged from going through this process. Or if you want to look at a different challenge, a second challenge, you're welcome to do that as well. Okay. All right. Feel free to turn off your cameras if you want some privacy and some space. So I think a big part of this process is actually being witnessed. There's something really powerful about that. And there's also something very powerful about hearing from somebody else's experience because, well, we only have one life, right? So we only get to experience so many different facets of possibilities. And what's beautiful about being in a collective group is we get to vicariously kind of live through somebody else's experience. So I wanted to open it up if what was that experience like for you? And you can, whatever comes up, like if you want to talk about your own process of going through that, or even that of witnessing somebody else's process. Perspective is everything, right? It really is. Like how it is that we view things, like from being a problem to actually being an opportunity. And to actually be feeling it, right? It's not just a cognitive exercise. There's a felt sense of that, like, oh, here's the potential for this, or here's the gift. Yeah, it really, I think it reconfigures something internally for us. And kind of as you mentioned, the hope is that when we enter a future challenge, of course, when we're in it, it's going to be awful. We can remember this view that there's an opportunity here. I can't feel it right now, but I know from my past experiences that if I wait long enough and I look back, there will be something that really came out of this. So thanks. There's something that is possible when we start shifting the view to everything that happens is information. Everything that happens offers me opportunities for growth. Everything that happens is path. And when we look at it from this view, equanimity is what arises. And what I mean by equanimity is we stop being so triggered by what's going on. Because we realize that whatever is going on is just information. And whatever is going on is going to serve me. It's going to serve me in the future so that I can become closer and closer and closer in alignment with what matters to me. It's part of my process of learning attunement. And that process is my gateway to connection. That process is my gateway to self-love. And it's through relating with others, or it's through having experiences that we're able to see our blind spots. Because if everything was perfect, if there's no problem, then there's no evolution. And so in this way, when I'm looking at it with this perspective or this view, then I stop having a preference actually for what goes on. Instead of being so heavily on the camp of like, I only want pleasant experiences and I don't want the unpleasant ones. It's like, no, actually, I kind of want both. Because one is really what is fueling my growth. And the other one is a place to enjoy and remind myself of what is offering balance. It's the whole. You can't have one without the other. Or would you want to even? And this starts changing for myself, at least. It started changing how I contend with anything that happens, right? Somebody shows up late, not a problem, right? It's information. I probably am going to ask more questions to see, is this a pattern? Is this a character? You know, like what's going on? Like, do I want to stay in this kind of dynamic? Or, you know, but it's not a big deal. I'll just start doing something else. There is no valence to it whatsoever for me. This is the point it's gotten to. Somebody disappoints me. I look at it, I'm like, oh, okay, they're trying to meet a need of their own, and their need is more important than mine at this point. I get it. It's information. I don't think I would like to maintain a relationship with somebody whose needs are always more important than mine. I'm not taking it personally. I know you're just doing the best to survive. It's cool. But this doesn't work for me. Right? So everything becomes a source of information. And what's happening is that my ability to be able to stay connected to what actually really matters versus being distracted by all the stories and all the whatever, you know, the places that we go. It's like, I don't go very far from what's actually happening anymore. The efficiency in how to navigate life and the level of joy and surprise and excitement, because everything now is a possibility. Because I've let go of anything having to be any particular way. Everything is possible. And what that's allowed me to do is take larger and larger risks because I don't care so much about the outcome. So why don't I just ask for what I want and just see what happens? And then I'm blown away when something happens. Right? Or if somebody is in a dynamic with me where it's causing excruciating pain, whereas before I would have like withheld from saying anything because I was afraid of them leaving. It's just like, I could just say it now, you know, that when this happens, this is what happens for me. And what that does is it creates more and more connection. Even if the decision is to leave that relationship, we're leaving still more connected than we started because we're making that decision grounded in truth. Everything has this felt sense quality of rightness. And I don't mean as in there's a right or a wrong, I mean as in correctness. Because I am attuned and I am in alignment with what is really of value to me. And from this place, others can feel safe around me. Because the energy that I am exuding is that of impeccability. And my impeccability is not towards others. My impeccability is towards myself. And if I am impeccable towards myself, there is something that feels really reassuring and attractive to other people. Because it lets them know that that's a possibility for them too. If she can be like that, maybe I can be like that. If that's possible in the world, then that changes my view of how the world is. Our inner work is the most fundamental work that we do. You are charged with a heart that has needs and yearnings. Your only responsibility in this lifetime is to attend to that heart. Everything else is your story. Of course, like if you have children, yeah, sure, we'll include them too. But your number one priority, even over your children, is still to attend to your heart. Because otherwise, anything that you're doing is contrived and disingenuous. And in doing that, if you are attending to the yearnings of your heart, if you are taking care of yourself, you are actually participating in a level of activism that this world needs, which is that we are shifting the collective towards a collective that is founded on what's true and that is prioritizing connection, alignment to our values, a commitment to being with what matters. It's a collective awakening that starts with you. So I wanted to thank you for prioritizing yourself. I know it's hard to do. We have busy lives. We have a lot of different priorities that are competing for our attention. And you made a decision to prioritize your own awakening, even if it's for just this moment. It doesn't matter. It's a step closer. And we're honored. Every one of us, when we go in the breakout rooms, we are deeply touched by each other. This is the potential gift that you offer to not only each other, but to the world. And so this inner work is the most important work that you can do. And I am so grateful that you've chosen to trust me in taking you into these crazy places to reconfigure how you potentially look at things.